We just did this, and I forgot how to get the record button working. But
And go.
And go. Here we are with your next favorite episode of the Into Greatness podcast. I am Jason.
I'm Jolene.
She gets to say her own name now.
I do. This is a whole new season.
Right? New rules. Yeah, I totally just blew my train of thought with that song.
I know, because I brought out another version of me. I brought in the stage version of me. We're going to talk about the different versions of ourselves, you know. We have different roles in our life that create demands and ways that we need to be to function in the world the way life is arranged for us. We also have socialized versions of ourselves. You know, we talk a lot about kind of our truest self, and then how things in our life happen, or relationships form and mold social norms, form and mold who we are as we start to grow from a child into adolescence and adulthood. And through that, you can kind of get into that like ego piece of where we start to learn how to behave to get the things that we need, or to avoid things that we don't want. And we armor ourselves up, and we put costumes on at different times. And it's not that we're not being true to ourselves. We are, in my opinion, I think we are truly trying to survive in the environment or their circumstances as best possible, so that we can have as little discomfort as possible.
I agree 100%. And that's where, like, you know, you're talking about like armoring up and stuff like that. Like people, you hear about dissociative disorder or multiple personality disorder, and these different personalities being created quite often out of trauma or abuse. They're in moments of, say, like being physically abused or sexually abused. So they almost create a different person so that they don't have to experience it. And they even forget these things happen, right? I mean, those are extreme cases of different versions of ourselves. But we're all affected by and changed by the experiences that we live through. And that will have us tweaking ourselves as we go along. And in certain cases, with certain people we interact with or jobs, you even slightly put on a different personality in order to do the work. Like, when you were working with the government work with some pretty fucked up people, for lack of a better word. So you probably weren't the same Jolene as you are, say, doing the work you're doing now privately, or when you went home to your kids or your spouse at the time.
I wasn't as soft. I talk about a softness and a hardness and an armored up version, a protected version a lot of the time. So yes. So something I do kind of pride myself on, and I think most people, is like underneath to the core, there is an essence of me that always exists within that. But different people in different situations are going to get different expressions of it. And it's almost like, here's the house. Some people are allowed in the front door. Some people are allowed in the back door. Don't take that the wrong way. And some people... It's true.
Oh my.
But like, we all have different boundaries and points of access and things. Like, you guys get a version of me here. And I've always been really clear on my social media page. Like, you are getting a self-disclosing version of me, but you are not truly getting the non-professional version of Jolene. Like, that's my private page, and there's always a censored, filtered version, believe it or not, on that page and here. So, you know, I think you're getting an authentic version of me, but not everyone gets like backroom access, or like in the kitchen with the cooks. You're allowed in the restaurant, but you're not always gonna like see the order forms and go to the distribution companies and stuff, right? So that's kind of the way I like to describe that, because sometimes people are like, well, does that mean I'm not being authentic? And that's what we start to grow into. And that's a beautiful thing about what I get to do in my work, is a lot of people are coming to me in their late 30s, 40s. Holy shit, lots of people in their 20s in this generation are doing the work that 40-year-olds from the 70s or 80s generations are finally working on. And those, like, when they were at 40, 50 years in their life. It's happening sooner, which I think is promising.
That's fantastic.
Because I look at some of these 21-year-olds I'm working with, and I'm like, what you are doing is what 50-year-olds are working on right now. So kudos to you. So I'm hopeful about future generations and evolution and living differently. But essentially, we go through all those years of armor to get to where we need to be and establish everything in our life. And then we reach a point where we're so unfulfilled and unsatisfied. And this is what a lot of my I Am the One workshop is based on. That we're like, I can't carry all of this anymore. And like, who is underneath all of this? and we start demasking and we start getting down to what that original truest version of us was. And then we decide what we're going to pick up and put back on instead of be forced to through parental connections or unsafe friendships or a job that requires so much of us. You know, I just had a young girl in my office yesterday, and it was my first time meeting her. And she's this beautiful feminine woman, and she is in a shark sales industry that is very patriarch and male dominated. And she kept telling me, like, I don't even know how I feel anymore. Like, I don't even know how I feel. And I'm like, I'm not surprised, because you are required to override that on a daily basis, regardless of how it makes you feel. And it didn't make her feel good, right? So it's about not quitting the job, but reconciling what her role there might be and what her self-expression is going to be, what her path is going to be there, if that is the industry she wants to be in, right? But these are all really great examples of how once we reach a point where we start connecting more with ourselves, we get to choose those costumes and pieces of clothing and accessories we put on instead of be forced to.
Exactly. That's working with Alicia, who's been my counselor. She always says you find peace when you get to your truest version of yourself, right? And so I've worked on that now for 5 years. But you need to. And it's funny how much, like, being at the paper, I look at that as like it was a great job in the sense of all the skill set it taught me.
Yes.
And the experiences I got, some of the experiences I got out of it. But from a personal thing, it was the absolute worst thing I could do. But I wasn't aware of that until I was too far in and how much it was affecting me. But that changed a lot of where I was. And I went, I think, to a lot darker place for a number of years because that's what it took to survive. Almost like a numbing of the soul in order to deal with these other people's traumas and grief and talk about it openly and talk to people who've experienced horrible things and even the horrible things I saw.
Yeah. And I was in the same place in my government job. That was when I was in my relationship with my ex-husband at the time. And that was all a very numb period of my life. And I remember when I had that realization a few years ago and went, like, what happened to that girl before that? Where did she go? What happened? Where is this disconnect? And there's this large chunk where it is. It was like this numbing. And I get to see that in hundreds of people that roll through my office. So I believe that is part of the human experience in terms of like what we have to go through in order to reach our points of evolution while we're here. And it looks different for everybody. And it happens at a different time in your life for everybody, right? And, some people will say, like, the term I was always told as a kid, like, you're an old soul, right? And, I look at that as in, like, this ain't your first rodeo here, right? So those people are getting those things happening earlier in life, tragedies earlier in life, those kinds of things. Some of the people who aren't getting to these places until later in life, maybe it's their first or second rodeo here, right?
Yep.
Depending on what your belief system is. So the cool thing I get to see is this is a very consistent pattern where people will go through these periods of numbness, darkness. They look back and they're like, how the fuck was I going through that? Like, what was that? I wasn't even aware of it. Like, it's so obvious to me now, but not then. And I think that is intentional numbness and blindness because we have to go through that in order to be where we are now. We just have to.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's, what is it called? It was an Egyptian phrase. It's like rebirth.
Yeah.
You got to go through something that changes you so you become reborn as a newer version of yourself. I guess you could say it's like the cocoon, the caterpillar cocoon, the butterfly kind of thing, right?
That's really funny because as you were saying that, I'm like, it's almost like when you go from the womb to the outside world. I'm like, it's the canal.
But in life.
Oh, man.
Yeah. But it's true, and you need to change. There's a prime example. It really hit me about a month ago. I found some of my old high school yearbooks.
Yes.
So I opened them up and I'm going through them. And Griffin's sitting with me and he's like, where's you? And I went to grade 11 me and I said, well, here I am. And he kind of looked at it. Then he looked up at me. Then he looked back at it. And then he looked up at me. And he goes, Dad, how do you go from that, who by any standard is a hardcore nerd, and then he pointed me to that, which is the opposite.
You're badass now.
Right? And I was just kind of like, it really made me think. And looking back, because I guess, not even being aware of the adoption thing at the time and just other stuff going on, I wasn't like a happy kid. Like I was a happy kid. I wasn't an unhappy kid, but something always was wrong. And I look back and I really did not like that version of me back then. Right? And that came across. And I kind of went through all these things to bring out the other sides of my personality that lay dormant for whatever, having a domineering adoptive mother or whatever, and then losing a father, all these things. But needed to kind of take that nerdy kid and beat him up a bit and force him to toughen up and adapt and learn all these skills that have made me the person I am now, where I still I hunt ghosts for a living. That's a pretty geeky thing to do. And I love my movies and stuff like that, right? But I also got an appreciation for stuff like boxing and yoga and hiking and the outdoors. And, I have my little adrenaline kick sports that I've done. So it's a change. You need to go through these changes. So you don't lose that, but you improve upon it. And I think you learn to like and appreciate yourself more.
Yeah.
But you got to go through that shit.
I really believe that. Like, and we've talked about that before. I think it was in our grief episode that, like, honestly, the hardest, darkest things have brought us to the most rewarding places, right? Neither one of us would be standing here without the tragedies in our lives. And I really believe that. And when people even talk about, difficulties living with their partner's pasts and things like that, or jealousy around exes and stuff. I mean, this is a little bit of a side segue or whatever, but I always say, I'm like, very rarely are people going back to their exes. You got to worry about the people they haven't met yet. Like, nobody wants to go back to their exes, right? But really looking and recognizing that, like, every single decision every person made led them to where they are. So we can't hate on that stuff. We can't, go back and really truly want to change that, because it's created the version of them that maybe you've fallen in love with, or like the version of us that's recording right now.
Yeah.
The version of us that you guys are getting right now. Like, you're getting a different version of us than you got in May when we recorded, right?
Oh, way different.
Everything that's occurring in our lives is constantly transforming us. And we hope that you guys are a different version of yourselves while you're listening here too. So I want you to kind of think, like, in the morning when you get ready, who are you? Like, who are you waking up as? Like, I'm very much waking up as a mom with kids screaming for me, but I'm getting dressed to either be a professional or, like today, to go to Pilates, to be a superstar, and then come here. Like, I'm dressing myself as a different version of myself, depending on what's demanded of me each day. And then I shift between roles constantly, often, right? Especially if, like, you're in work mode and then all of a sudden something comes up with your kid and you go into dad mode. And, it's really cool. If you were to look at yourself as this really neat shapeshifter, we morph and adjust into all these roles. The other thing that's happening that so many times we're unaware of is during all of our day-to-day interactions, we get triggered into those previous versions of ourselves all the time. So now your boss comes to you and is questioning about such and such, and you like shrink down to the 6-year-old version of you, and it's dad yelling at you, and all of a sudden you're a 6-year-old at the newspaper being like, yeah, okay, and now you're distracted. Where do I start? What's happened? What did he ask me to do? Okay, I can't go back. We are constantly slingshot back into these versions of our lives until we manage to resolve traumas. And like EMDR is great for that. Other somatic releases are really good for that. But until we're able to really integrate and call forward all these versions of us and have better control over them, we're doing that while we're in the present moment, being all these roles that we need to be.
Oh, yeah. And
it's wild.
It is wild. And you're right. And I see so many people that haven't reconciled those past traumas or versions of themselves that are stuck in a loop because they don't want to, or it's too hard, or they don't want to face it, or for whatever varying reason.
Or they just don't know.
They don't even know. They haven't figured it out.
They're still in that numb stage.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there was a huge version of me in that numb stage that I'm like, oh yeah, that was like 12-year-old me for a couple years, or 19-year-old me, right?
Right.
Or whatever version, like even like 24-year-old me, just being 24-year-old me, right? Yeah, totally. So sometimes they're aware, sometimes it's too hard, and sometimes they have no idea.
Yeah.
Until something activates that process.
Yeah, and hopefully, because I've seen some people who've never had that process activated at all.
And there they are on their deathbed, and
like
still no self-awareness. And you're like, oh, this was their first life here.
Yeah. This
Got
is their chance at it, right?
Yeah. And then all the people in their lives, it's like their 9th life because they had to cope with that shit for so long and work through so many things.
Oh, yeah.
I'm thinking of your mom here.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
It is wild. So being able to kind of look at all of that, and I want you to kind of think to yourself, what are the versions of you that you like the best? Right?
Yeah.
Like I really like work version of me. And what influences that is that I get to be living out the majority of my life purpose there. I am mostly uninterrupted, guys. I love my office. I'm focused. I have a start, a stop. I can actually eat my lunch because I pack it and I will give myself time to eat it.
Yeah, yeah.
There are things in my actual workday and in the role that I have, and I'm my own boss, so I'm calling the shots everywhere there. Whereas so many other areas of my life, I am not.
Yeah.
But I'm expected to be, right? Like, you're in charge, but you don't get to fucking make all these decisions, right? Like,
yeah. Life makes it for you.
Oh my God. So I really like the controlled environment that my work offers me, the consistency, the calm, and most of all, that reciprocal exchange of my giving and my work, and then equipping everyone else to go out and live their better lives too, right? So I really love that. And then there's small moments where I love being a mom.
Small special
Just
moments.
kidding, right? Yeah, no, of course. But like, being a mom is so different if I don't have any other things that I need to worry about. I actually fantasize sometimes about just being a mom. And if like some other things were taken care of in my life, I think I would like love so much more of that, right? I love when I can really be present with them and it's just kind of me and my kids doing our thing. And that's why I would love going out to the lake with them for periods of time. And it was just kind of us being free. I like was disconnected from everything, right? Yeah. So I do really love those kind of pieces. And now a new version of me that is a healed version of me in a new role as a girlfriend. I really like that too when she's behaving. Because fuck, again, there's all these previous versions that come out for both of us, right? And we're both very conscious and aware of that, and we talk through it, and it's such a safe place for all of that. But yeah, that's exactly it. Like here, it's like 41-year-old Jolene, and then all of a sudden there's like this like 21-year-old version of me that starts to like pull back or, you know, create some distance, armor up. That's my thing. I armor up because I'm like, okay, I'm bracing for impact here, and everything's getting heavy, so I just got to hold it all, right?
Yeah.
So that's when she starts misbehaving by retracting, right?
Putting on the bat suit.
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't fit anymore, guys. It doesn't fit.
That's another reality of life.
Yeah. So what about you? Like, what roles do you like?
I like the badass Jay, but I like how badass Jay at the same time can hang out with his son on his bed playing with his stuffies and become these different personalities within the stuffies, like Bowen the bear or Jake the shark kind of thing. I like how I can do that. There's a time I couldn't. Yeah. I could not connect with that part of me, the kid-like part. And
your Lego here.
And right? My Lego here, right? Yeah. So I think I'm liking that the badass Jay can be kind of that kid a bit again, but it's a different kid. I think that's something that's important to realize too. Even when you connect with that child isn't going to be the child you remember from that era. Like, what prime example, my buddy Carl, who I've mentioned before, he's the big nostalgia guy. Our favorite cartoon as a kid was Mighty Orbots. And he found it on YouTube. And he's like, I found Mighty Orbots on YouTube. And he sent it to me like, fuck yeah, I'm going to sit down and watch this right now. And I got it halfway through the first one. I'm like, this is horrible. Like, I can't connect with it on that level of being that kid. I couldn't. And it was just, I acknowledged all the flaws of it. Yeah. And stuff. And like, why are they got so much narration? They don't need that. You know what I mean? It was funny. I couldn't disconnect that. So there's moments, but I can go back and watch Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Right.
And be that kid again.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that, Jay, because when we start to do inner child healing, which I'm sure you've been doing with Alicia, and especially just going back and doing your trauma work, we start to equip that younger version of ourselves with what they needed, which was an adult that was safe and secure, or maybe a voice, or maybe an exit out of a situation. And we recall them forward to integrate them with the current version of us. And I say that from like a psychological, neurological perspective, but also when I'm working with energy, which I do in my work, I energetically call back those versions of individuals as well and reconcile that in the energy bodies. So there is this huge piece where that child is now equipped and doesn't have the same negative cognitions, doesn't have the same insecurities, is able to maybe safely self-express and will experience all those things differently. Yeah. Which then brings this weird kind of grief of like, oh, it's not the same. And it's like, it's not supposed to be.
No, it can't.
But recognize that what it offered you as a child and what it offered your buddy as a child is exactly what it needed to at the time.
Exactly. And that's the thing. It's like when they say like you can't go home again, it's like in a way you can't because it's different now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? But it doesn't negate the memories of it. It's just some things can't be revisited in the same manner.
Yeah. I mean, tell Uncle Rico that. He thinks he's making the team still.
Uncle Rico, it's long past, buddy. Go have a chicken quesadilla.
So for you guys, I really want you to think, which roles of you are you most fond of? Which roles do you resent? Like, are there roles that you resent? So Jay, for you, do you resent some roles sometimes?
Oh, sure. I think it's just natural.
Yep.
Just because, like you say, when you're depleted, like there's a while there, it was hard to be the husband when I just had so much other stuff going on, But that phase, like we talked about before, that passed.
Yeah.
And that time went. I'm not so much a son anymore. I think there's a part of me having now found birth, like my birth family, and being like a son again. When that was over, like I kind of finished that already. So it's like when there's moments when I'm kind of called on to be that son, I'm kind of like, well, I've done this.
Yes.
And I don't really want to again. Like which is hard. It's kind of hard to bring that up, but you don't. I did it. Yeah. I did it. And that's over. I'm happy to be like a father and a husband now, not a kid again.
Yeah. Something I talk about with my clients lots is when they are often we're healing like ancestral wounds, right? Yep. We are healing things that our generations before has passed down. And often it's like grandma taught mom this, which is also how to sew and how to preserve food and how to live and how to raise a family and all these lovely things that we get passed down in our lives. But we also pass down some of the wounds and stuff too. So grandma taught mom something and then mom taught us something. And now that generation's going like, oh, I got to tidy up all this stuff because I don't like the way my life is. So then they start going back and looking at these familial patterns. And it's like, okay, wait a sec. I'm supposed to teach my mom this now? I'm supposed to be her parent? And I was like, yeah, so that's kind of how it works, I think. And this is the pattern I'm seeing, right? I'm like, when it comes to like learning to survive and the things that you're going to need in your homework box, that's passed down. And when you find some of the solutions, yeah, that's your job to pass it back up. And you get to do the healing so that it goes backwards and forwards for the generations to come. So I'm sorry, but yeah, that's your homework. And they're like, I don't want to be my mom's mom. And I was like, too bad.
Yep.
You got the golden Willy Wonka ticket.
You have to do so. And sometimes as kids, we do have to do that.
Yeah.
Right? Although if it's past, I think if it's your parents' trauma, it's not on us to fix that for them.
No, but what I've found is really beautiful ways to equipped people with the ways to model the change in living, and it inspires the moms. This happens a lot because I attract a lot of women to my practice, and that's what my workshop attracts as well. And when the offspring, like when the daughters are working through their stuff, the mom starts to see how it changes their lives. And where that creates conflict is if there's a change in relationship and mom is resentful in an unfulfilling relationship or something like that. And she's like, oh my God, I am so proud of you because this has been my struggle for the last 20 years or something, right? And then there's this like, I see how happy you are, and that's what I've been resentful of not having for my life. And they didn't have Instagram. They didn't have Facebook. All they had was neighbors around them, and they compared to them. That was all they had. That was their resource. They had maybe magazines or fucking
radio and
Montel
TV,
Jordan, or not Montel, Montel Williams, right? Like all these talk shows. That's where you got your life experience and your tips from, right?
That's a sad reality to get your life experience
now,
from Montel Williams.
If you want to change your life, if you want to exercise, if you want to diet differently, if you want to change your psychological structure and stuff, you can look that shit up, right? Like our previous generations didn't have that. So I'm like, you have this massive toolbox. It's your job to share that so that they at least know they can change something if they want to. They don't even know these things exist. And that's been really beautiful. So as long as you're not taking responsibility for your parents' healing, but you do share the opportunity, it's really beautiful. And I've seen it start to filter up into previous generations. Where it gets pretty gridlocked is when you get to the grannies who are at their end stage and they're like, hard no, right? But you still get to make those change and shifts because now maybe mom's setting better brownies and boundaries with granny. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool to see.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah. So, look at your roles along the midsection and in your life.
That you play, the parts you play, and which ones work for you, which don't. How could you see changing those roles to kind of get the best version of yourself?
Yeah, and to make sure that you still have your authentic expression throughout all of them, because I believe that in all the roles of my life, I don't truly change who I am to the core, but you get different flavors of me. Whereas like if you feel like you are inauthentic in any of your roles, then those are the ones you really want to look and be like, what's preventing me from bringing my truer self to this? Because we're going to have so many versions of self-expression. We just want to make sure that they are as authentic as they can be in those times.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well said, Jolene.
Aw, thanks.
That wraps up this episode of the Integrateness Podcast. We're back next week with your next favorite episode. Until then, I'm Jason.
I'm Jolene.
Talk to you soon.